What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Terminator Training Show. I'm Kevin Smith, back with another Q&A episode from my Instagram story, Q&A option. If you want your question answered on a future episode, follow me on Instagram, Terminator_training. There's a link in the description. And you can look out for my weekly, sometimes bi-weekly Q&A opportunities where you can ask your question if it's a good question. Or candidly, for this week's episode, if it's one of the first questions, just because I posted this like an hour ago and I'm going over it. Usually I go over the questions on Instagram first, at least some of them. And then I do the episode the next day. But just for scheduling reasons, I was a guest on a podcast yesterday and I didn't really get to it the same day of the week that I usually do. So today I put the question story up about an hour ago, and I've gotten quite a few already, and I will refresh it a couple times throughout this episode and find some newer ones, but I'm getting to those first. But either way, if you ask a good question and or occasionally if you ask a early on question, I should be able to get to it and give you a good answer, give you more of a comprehensive answer here on the show. I also recently did a couple of polls on Instagram. One of them asked if you guys would prefer for me to talk a little bit about some life updates, training updates, like I do on many, but not all of my episodes, or if you want me to just get straight into it. And I think it was like 86-14 in favor of life updates. So although I won't do that on every single episode, it's good to hear back from you guys and know that I'm not just talking to myself and you guys just don't skip over that part. Honestly, when you're talking to yourself and the only rating system that you have is your followers and or your subscribers or your downloads per episode, or on Spotify and Apple Podcasts where you can rate or comment on certain things, that's really all I got for feedback, because I'm not talking to anyone, and podcasts are kind of like future gratification rather than immediate gratification, because I don't release these podcasts for a couple days usually afterwards. Sometimes I'll do them like all in one day, but rare. But anyway, I appreciate your feedback if you did, and good to know that you guys aren't bored just me talking about what's going on in my life. My life is not all that exciting, but I do try and share a little bit of things going on just so you guys have a little bit of a behind the scenes look and a little update on some of the stuff I'm working on, as well as fitness and other random things that are going on in my life. And the other poll question was, would you guys prefer me to do similar setups to what I usually do, where I go over lots of questions? I try to be very comprehensive and detailed with my answers, but sometimes I am a little bit shorter with them. Or if you guys would prefer only 5-6 questions per episode, where I go a little bit deeper on all of them. And that one was 50-50. So I'll do a little bit of both. Today's going to be more questions, less depth. But still, I think you guys could probably agree that most of my questions are pretty in-depth. I don't really skip over things, and I try not to just leave you guys hanging and not knowing anything, not having any steps to take in order to implement whatever it is into your life. But either way, I'll do a little bit of mix of those moving forward. But if you participate in that poll, I appreciate your feedback, and thank you guys very much for listening. And also, just want to say that I truly appreciate all of the reviews, especially on Spotify. I think I'm up to like 290 5-star reviews, maybe 280. But either way, the 5-star review per download ratio of the show is pretty awesome. I'm not going to get into like how many episodes are how many downloads occur per episode or anything like that, but needless to say, it's a pretty great ratio, and I do appreciate the loyalty, and I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to go hit that button. And or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate comments, shares, likes, whatever you guys kind of get from that episode or the episodes in general. So I work really hard on this, and it makes that work a lot more fulfilling when I get good feedback from you guys, or bad feedback or constructive feedback. I always appreciate that too. I'm not perfect, and I'm just a one-man show at the moment. So I do my best to make things as high quality as possible. But also at the same time, I am not really here to make production value, like very high production value content. The goal with my content is to make it digestible and easy to understand and easy to follow and practical, easily implementable to your life to improve in whatever area we talk about on a given day or a given question. So anyway, that took a while, so I'm not going to get into any life updates. I don't really have many life updates other than the fact that I unfortunately was unable to run in my ultra due to my calf issue, which is starting to get better. I haven't run on it yet, but I've been doing some incline walking and some Stairmaster, and that was hurting for a while leading into what would have been the ultra, but it is completely pain-free now, and I don't think it's quite the right idea to start running quite yet, but most likely I'll probably test the waters with that with a easy trail run on a sand trail behind my house, like lower impact, most likely early next week. And hopefully it's pain-free or very minimal pain, especially the next day. That was really the thing that was bothering me the most, was not the intra run pain, but the pain the next day. I would just struggle to even walk for a while there, especially after my last, what should have been 22, 23 mile run that I cut off at 16 miles. That was kind of like the thing that really determined what my chances were for actually running the ultra. And I deemed it the right decision, even though my ego really wanted me to run. I deemed it the right decision not to run. And so hopefully you guys were able to see what went down during my prep, as well as how I was able to maintain and or gain strength in certain lifts. I ended up increasing my deadlift by 15 pounds or so throughout that time, throughout that ultra prep, and maintain the same weight, which honestly was more of a mistake. But I might in the future, if you guys are interested, let me know in the comments or shoot me a DM or whatever. I might go fully over my ultra prep and some of the mistakes I made, so you guys can like learn from what I did wrong and how to implement certain things into your life. And also why I think it's very important that even me, as someone I consider to be a good coach to other people, a very good coach to other people, I'm not a very good coach for myself, because I always bias what I want to do rather than what I need to do. And that is something that kind of bit me in the ass on this ultra prep. So planning on finding another ultra to run either in the fall or potentially a similar or the same ultra next year in the spring. I don't believe there are many, if any, ultra marathons in the summertime in North Carolina, just because of the weather. It's very hot and humid, and that would be a little bit crazy. But I am looking forward to getting back into running, and I am glad that I didn't run it, because if I did, I'd probably be out for months and months trying to rehab my lower leg. So anyway, let's hop into today's questions. First question, what is your opinion on very aggressive but short calorie deficits? In most cases, if I'm talking to most people, I would say not a very good idea, only because you are more likely to not only regain what you lose during this period of time, but potentially even regain it and then some, and end up worse than where you started. That is the case for most people in most scenarios when trying to do this. Now, if you are going to do something extreme like this, doing it for a short period of time, and I would say a short period of time, a month, maybe 6 weeks at the very most, would probably be what I would max out at. And also, the most important part of this is not what you do during those 6 weeks or 4 weeks or however long you do it. It is having an exit strategy for afterwards when you get back to normal life. Most people do this kind of last minute, whether they are prepping for a vacation or they want to look really good in their wedding dress or wedding attire, or they're trying to look really good for something or what they deem is very important, which I'm all for. That's totally fine. I understand that. However, a lot of times when people go into something like this, they don't have a plan for afterwards. And what does that usually result in? Just going off the deep end, going off the rails afterwards and eating like crazy, because your body's just kind of starved and it really wants to hang on and consume everything it possibly can. Your body doesn't know that like you have this really important thing and you really want to look good, but you also don't want to just lose your marbles afterwards and end up right back where you started or worse. Your body's just main goal is to survive. And coincidentally, throughout this time, that's pretty much what your body's going to be doing, is trying to survive. Not necessarily perform well, not necessarily feel good, not necessarily give you a bunch of energy to do a bunch of other stuff that you normally would do throughout the day. It's probably going to be pretty stressful and pretty miserable. You're going to be hungry a lot. You are not going to feel great. You're not going to train. Your training performance is not going to be where it has been when you are even eating at maintenance or even in a small calorie deficit. So expectation management and having an exit strategy is incredibly important. But generally speaking, if you want long-term success, doing it slow and methodically and reasonably, A, you're going to feel better, and B, it's also going to help you develop habits that are more practical for long-term weight maintenance and health maintenance. Whereas when you just do all of these extreme things, you give yourself a 1,500 calorie deficit and maybe do a bunch of cardio and a bunch of circuit training and all that kind of stuff. Your body's probably going to lose some muscle. Even if you are eating plenty of protein, if you don't go about the training the proper way, aka focus mainly on lifting weights and sending your body a signal to build muscle, but also in a reduced volume and potentially even a reduced intensity, just because you're going to have to train a little bit less intense than you normally do because you're just not going to feel like going hard. You're not really setting yourself up for future success. So although you might have success, brief transient success on this plan, in the future, your habits are not going to be such that you can maintain it very well. Unless, of course, like I said, you have a great exit strategy. You know exactly what you're doing afterwards as far as reintroducing more calories, getting back into a normal functioning state that you were before. And or if you've done this before successfully and you have experience with it and you know what it feels like and you know what it's going to feel like afterwards, and you have some sort of plan in place for after. So for the most part, I would say not the best call. But again, if you have a good plan, and if you are aware of all the likely detriments that you're going to see throughout this time, then it can be done. Just would not be my recommended approach for most people. Next question, did you ever consider going to SWCS during your career in SOF? Yes, I did consider it, but the main reason I didn't is I kind of just almost lucked out. And I say lucked out only because throughout most of my career, I didn't really want to go to SWCS, although there are some good SWCS gigs. SWCS, by the way, for those who are not aware, is basically you're going to the training detachment for SF. So you may work in the Q course, you may work at selection, you may work at SOPSI, you may be an instructor. So like for me, I was a medic, so I could go to the schoolhouse and instruct during SOCM or SFMS, or you can go to free fall and be a free fall instructor, dive school, so on and so forth. So you're basically an instructor, whether you're teaching Q course students or pre-Q course students or guys who have already made it through, and you're a Fox course instructor or an 18 Delta instructor or something like that. So the main reason I didn't is because right when I was supposed to be nearing my SWCS time, usually it's very different for everyone, but usually within 5 to 7 years or so, that's when you start getting looked at for SWCS. And usually, although you can request it, usually guys don't. Some guys do, just for family reasons. Usually it's a very stable few years where you're actually just kind of living in the same spot. Even if you are working kind of a less favorable job, you're going home most nights, seeing your family, you're not deploying, you're not on a team, and your life is a little bit more predictable. So sometimes guys will request it, but usually guys just get kind of what's called on the SWCS levy. You get on the SWCS levy after a certain amount of time, and you go and you do your time, and then you go back to group. When I was nearing that time, I ended up taking the long walk and going to CAG selection, and I made it. And so then I got PCS'd to Fort Bragg. They moved me to Fort Bragg to go through OTC. I think if you've been listening for a while, you know what happened with OTC. I did not pass OTC, unfortunately, so didn't end up going to the unit as an operator. But because of that, I pretty much missed that window. And when I got back to group, when I went to third group afterwards, they transferred me to third group from 10th group. It almost kind of reset my time. When you go to OTC, you pretty much fall off the Army's roster almost. You basically you lose all of your previous Army identifiers almost. When I showed back up to third group, like they had no idea that I was even coming or who I was or what the hell to do with me. So neither here nor there. But anyway, that kind of restarted my time. So I only did probably 3.5, 4 years at third group. Additionally, I also went to the Fox course after a few years at third group as an E7. And what likely would have happened if I had stayed in is I probably would have been an 18 Fox on my team for a year, maybe 2 years. Usually guys who are new Foxes don't get sent to the Fox or don't get sent to SWCS anytime soon after they finish the Fox course. Not always, but oftentimes that's what happens. So that kind of made it so that I was most likely just going to stay on my team for a while and be the Fox. And then also I was getting close to being promotable to E8. So I'd probably be a team sergeant right now, or maybe even close to being done with my team sergeant time had I stayed in. I probably would still be a team sergeant. So therefore I most likely would not have gone to SWCS. You can go to SWCS later in your career. Some guys do go to SWCS twice if they're in long enough. They'll go in as an E6 or an E7, and then they'll go maybe later as an E8 or an E9. But either way, there's a chance I could have gone to SWCS and I would have been totally fine with it at this stage, but that's kind of what happened. That's the main reason I didn't go. There are definitely some lucrative jobs at SWCS. There are definitely some non-lucrative jobs, and there's a lot that kind of goes into getting the job that you want versus not getting the job you want. That's a topic for a different day, but that is the main reason I didn't go to SWCS. Most people will at some point or another go and do their SWCS time, but every situation's a little bit different. Next question, do you plan rucks on their own dedicated day, or do you often pair them with strength work? Usually for rucks, the best way to do it is on their own day. Just because if you're going to do a solid ruck session, it's probably going to be a pretty long session. Whereas with running, you usually can do shorter sessions and still get a lot out of them. Rucks usually are going to be at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, depending on where you're at in your training and what the goal is. But, if I'm rucking for an hour, 75 minutes, 90 minutes, I don't really ruck anymore. But hypothetically, if I was, then it's usually a better idea not to do them on the same day as strength. Does that mean you can't do them on the same day as strength? No. I usually, in this situation, if you're doing a strength session plus a ruck on the same day, I would split them up into 2 sessions instead of doing them back to back. But even that, you could do a quick strength session followed by a ruck. And if you fuel and hydrate properly throughout and you're well fed going in, then that's doable too. Kind of just depends on your schedule. But ideally, in a perfect world, you'd split them up. And or even more ideally, I would do them on separate days. That way you can just focus on your strength work, and maybe you can definitely double up strength and shorter, more intense runs. That would be kind of a more acceptable way to do it. But for rucking, usually it's better to just kind of do them on their own day and do your strength on other days, but not always. Next question, what is your opinion on ruck trainers, a ruck frame using a plate for weight versus a regular ruck? Totally fine if you're just training for it. If you are going to a selection that requires a specific ruck and you are not familiar with that ruck, then I would definitely familiarize yourself with that exact ruck. So if you're prepping for SFAS, usually a good idea to just wear the Molly ruck, or at least wear it a few times, pack it a few times, get familiar with it. And then if you want, you can switch to a different ruck. The feel of a packed ruck with a bunch of equipment versus a ruck with a little peg that comes out where you put a 45-pound plate on or whatever is a little bit different. But is it different enough to make or break your potential selection chances? No. It just feels a little bit different because the weight distro is not the same. But ruck trainers are totally fine for building fitness. Just make sure that you're familiar with whatever ruck you're going to be using at whatever selection you're going to. A lot of people will say you have to use the exact ruck every single time, whatever, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I did 100% of my CAG selection train up using my Tactical Tailor Malice Pack. And the ruck that they used there was the Molly 2, and that's a different ruck than the Tactical Tailor, but I was already very familiar with the Molly 2 because that's what I used for SFAS. That's what I used throughout the Q course until Sage, where you could kind of use your own ruck. So I was familiar with it, and I got to the long walk. They gave me a ruck, and not once at that selection was I like, damn it, I wish I practiced with the exact same ruck that I was wearing here. It just doesn't make that much of a difference. Again, unless you're not familiar. If you've never packed a Molly ruck, or if you're not familiar with how it feels, or if you're not familiar with some of the drawbacks to it, like usually the straps get really loose and whatnot, then you definitely want to familiarize yourself with it. And also, another kind of argument towards not using your Molly ruck in particular for all of your training is just that the straps will get worn down. The strap fasteners will get worn down. And over time, you'll find that you're yanking those things down to tighten them a lot more often. So if you can kind of save that by, again, familiarizing yourself with it, but maybe not doing all of your training. If you have a brand new ruck, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But by the time I was like halfway through the Q course, I'd used that same Molly ruck for SOPSI and selection and all my training and all the other stuff that requires a ruck in the Q course. By the time I got to like SUT, my ruck was already to the point where I just had to tighten it all the time. And it gets really annoying. It's not going to like hurt you or make or break your chances. It's just really annoying. And I would much rather tighten the straps, set it and forget it, and only focus on the task at hand rather than trying to retighten my straps all the time. So if you have kind of a worn down ruck and you're not going to be able to get a new one before you go to selection, then you want to consider that. the more you use it, the more it's going to get worn down. So that's another consideration for potentially using a ruck trainer or a different ruck than what you're going to be using at that selection. So not a huge deal either way. Ruck trainers are totally fine. Any other ruck, if it's not a ruck that you're wearing at selection, is fine too. Just make sure you're somewhat familiar with it. Next question, how should training and diet look immediately after returning from SERE? Yeah, this is a good one because a lot of people really struggle with this because SERE, depending on what SERE you go to, there's a bunch of different SEREs run in a bunch of different locations and by different branches. But assuming you're talking kind of Q-Core SERE, honestly, they probably all have a lot in common. And the main thing here is that you're probably not going to be eating all that much, if anything, for a good period of time. So you're going to lose some weight. You are going to be definitely depleted. Your body's going to be in an overly stressed out state because you didn't really sleep much either. And that's kind of the nature of SERE. So I would recommend kind of getting any cravings and anything you've been thinking about, which naturally everyone's just going to be thinking about all the food that they're going to eat when they get out of there. And you will eat a little bit at SERE before you actually get back into civilian life. You'll get like at least a few meals before you're completely done and back at Fort Bragg or back at wherever your home station is. But at the same time, you're still probably going to be really craving some stuff. So I don't think there's anything wrong with getting that out of your system. Maybe having that first weekend when you get back, you just don't really care much about your nutrition. You just eat whatever you were craving and maybe go enjoy yourself and lay low, catch up on sleep and chill out. But also have some sort of exit strategy after that and be like, okay, this is the day that I'm getting back on track and eating like a responsible adult who cares about my health and fitness would. So maybe that's like the following Monday or the following Tuesday. Maybe you get back on a Friday. By Monday, I'm getting back on track. That's a very good strategy and something a lot of people struggle with. And it's easier said than done. Sitting here and just comfortable and not really feeling the effects of starvation, it's super easy to be like, oh yeah, I can just get on track. That's super easy. But your hormones, your hunger hormones are going to be all out of whack and your body's going to be really wanting and craving lots and lots of calories. And some of those calories may not be the healthiest. And so if you continue to do that for a week, 2 weeks, like some people do, then that's just more work on the back end that you're going to have to kind of undo all of those bad decisions that you made throughout that time. So getting back on track, really prioritizing protein. You want to make sure that you're eating enough food to stay full, but also not so much food that you are just gorging yourself and force feeding yourself and feeling terrible all the time and getting fat and holding onto a bunch of water and getting super inflamed. So really prioritize protein, fiber, getting back on track, getting back to your normal pre-SERE eating schedule, eating routine, do some meal prepping, meal planning, or maybe outsource it by getting some meal prep delivery. That way you are not making all these decisions based on how you feel in the moment. You're just deciding what to eat that one time or twice a week, however often you do it. And that way you just have that ready to go. Training wise, returning from SERE is a little bit different than Ranger School, where you are not going to be quite as beat the hell up like you are after Ranger School. Even though at Ranger School you get food, you don't get nearly enough food, and it's so long, especially if you're a recycle. You recycle multiple phases and you pretty much go through Ranger School plus. Your body's going to be in a very, very stressed out state after that, and you really are going to be weak and struggling with your fitness for the couple weeks to couple months after Ranger School. But SERE, you're just not there for long enough. Yeah, you probably didn't work out for like the 3-ish weeks that you were there, and that's enough time to lose some, especially if you're not sleeping and not eating well. But it should be relatively easy to regain. What I would not do, unlike nutrition, getting back onto the same plan that you were doing beforehand. With training, you want to ease back into it and maybe take a very easy week where you slowly start ramping things up. Keep the RPE for lifting like 5 to 7. Don't try and push anything crazy. Don't get back and start running super high mileage. Don't just basically have the mindset of easing back into it rather than trying to make up for all that lost time, which is, again, very duh. Like, of course, that's what I'm going to do. But most people don't do that. Most people just get right back into what they were doing before. And that's not a very good idea because, again, you're just in a stressed out state. You haven't trained for a while. You detrained a little bit. Your fitness levels are lower than they were before. And your body's just not primed to be able to handle the same intensity / volume as you were doing before. So easing back into it, I would say a week and a half, you should be back up to where you can train pretty normally again. And as long as you are not overdoing it, you should be feeling totally fine after a few days of good solid training, good solid eating, really good sleep. That's another huge one to focus on, is getting excellent sleep, getting back to where you're getting to bed around the same time, waking up around the same time, as much as you're able to do during the Q course. It's not always possible, but those would be my post-SERE recovery recommendations in a nutshell. Next question, any ETA for SFAS version 2.0 program? I have a selection in February, not SFAS, so just wondering if I should wait for 2.0. Yeah, so the next program that I'm coming out with is not going to be a SFAS specific program. It's going to be a ruck run lift program that can be used for various different types of selections. So other than like BUDS, which is very, very swim dominant, pretty much if you have a run or ruck based selection or a mix of both, and you want to also do some strength training with it, gain some strength, maintain some strength, whatever your kind of goals are, this will be a good program for that, an appropriate program for that. So it's not going to necessarily be SFAS version 2. It'll be general ruck run-based selection prep. And there will be options throughout the program depending on which selection you're going to. So if you're going for the long walk, you're going to want to make it more ruck dominant. If you're going to SFAS, it's going to be more of a balance between running and rucking, depending on what your strengths and weaknesses are. If you're a really good runner, you suck at rucking, then you can do some more rucking, and vice versa. But it's going to be more general, but also plenty of volume, intensity, and intentionality for prepping and making sure you're good to go for selection. So I don't know what selection you're prepping for. You said non-USA, non-SFAS, but if it's ruck and run dominant, this program should absolutely suffice for you. When will it be done? It's most likely going to be done sometime in June, maybe early July, but it could also be earlier than that. It takes me a lot of behind the scenes work to make these programs. If you've used one of my programs before, you know that it's not just like a Word document where I type a bunch of stuff out like a lot of programs out there. I put a lot of work into it. My wife also is involved in not the programming X's and O's, but the completion of the program, making it look nice, setting it all up in a way that's user friendly. So working on it, and it should be out within the next couple of months. Next question, trail running versus road running. Personal preference, or do they have unique training purposes? Yeah, good question. If you are prepping for a road run, probably most of your running should occur on roads. If you're prepping for a trail run, probably most of your running should occur on trails. Aside from that, if you just enjoy running and you want to just build general running ability, a little bit of a mix of both is probably a great option. Usually for slower, not quite as speed dominant runs, doing that on a trail would be a great option just because A, it's more mentally stimulating. By the way, my personal preference is a little bit of both. If I'm doing an easy run or a long run, I prefer doing it mostly on trails. If I'm doing speed work or faster running or tempo work, I prefer doing it on roads. And honestly, that would be kind of the way that I recommend setting it up. Unless, of course, like I said, you're prepping for something very specific that's going to occur on one or the other. But even if you are prepping for a road race, say you're prepping for a half marathon that's going to be on a road, you can absolutely do at least one of your runs every single week on trails, or two of your runs. I would do your race-specific training on as close to the race course as possible on terrain that's very close to the race course. So if you're doing tempo work or speed work for a road race, you're probably going to want to do most of that on the road. Also, it's usually a little bit safer depending on what your trails look like. Doing speed work, tempo work, when there's a bunch of roots or rocks is sometimes a little bit dangerous for injury's sake. But also, you can do, say, a long run per week on a trail. The good thing about trails, of course, there's a lot of variety in different types of trails. Some trails are very technical. You can absolutely hurt yourself by stepping in the wrong place or whatever. But some trails are a little bit more forgiving and you can just go out and enjoy yourself and run forever. The good thing about something like that is it's not quite as stressful on the body because the ground, the surface that you're running on is a little bit less rock solid, like running on pavement or concrete. So that would be one really good benefit to it. I would still, if you are doing, say, a half marathon on the road, I would still occasionally do a long run on roads just to build that tolerance up and build those adaptations that you need from the actual impact. But sometimes you can absolutely implement some trail runs and be totally fine. And vice versa. If you're prepping for an ultra like I was, and it's going to be on a trail, you can still do some runs on roads. Even during my ultra prep, I did speed work on roads. Pretty much almost always on roads. I would do some quality speed during my longer runs, which would occur mostly on trails, but for like really specific tempo work and specific repeat work and things like that, I would do it on roads. You can do that on tracks too, of course. You can do it on treadmill also. So generally speaking, almost regardless, I would do a mix of both. Now, if you don't have access to any trails, that's one thing. But if you are running multiple days a week, 4, 5, 6 days a week on the road, that can be a little rough on the joints, a little bit stressful. But some people can handle it. You can work your way up to where you can handle it. But even high-level runners who are road racers through and through, they will still do some of their runs on trails because, again, it's just a little bit less stressful. Of course, unless you're going on crazy trails that are, mountainous or rocky or tons and tons of roots, that's another thing. But even though that sounds like a pure downside, having a bunch of technical stuff that you have to really focus on, that can actually be an upside because it keeps you very present and you're able to really focus and you detach from the world around you and you're literally just focused on where you're going to put your next foot. So that can be a benefit too. So I like both. Really depends on what you're going for, but generally speaking, a mix of both is usually a good idea. Next question, doing your 2 and 5 mile program through the summer. How do I keep my running gains after? Great question. I will likely, by the early fall next year, I'll likely have a follow-on program for that, a running program. That's going to be a little longer, and it's going to be a little bit of a break from the pretty intense speed work that you do during the 2 and 5 mile. And it'll be a little bit higher volume, running volume, weekly mileage will be higher for about 4 weeks of that program, and then it'll go into another phase where you do more speed stuff. So it's almost like a follow-on. It's almost like a deload from the 2 and 5 mile program for the first bit of it, which I usually recommend if you do 12 weeks of like a speed block, which is pretty much what the 2 and 5 mile program is. Continuing to just smash speed every single week after that, usually not the best idea. Usually taking a little bit of a dial back, upping the volume, upping the aerobic base, focusing on more general running adaptations rather than specific adaptations for a little while to kind of let your body reset and expand that bottom of the pyramid, that aerobic base, before getting back into more speed is almost always for most people a good idea. So that's kind of that program. Again, that's not going to be out till probably early to mid fall next year, but you can take a look out for that. But at the same time, I have other programs that are already out that you can maintain your speed on, or even build a little bit of speed from where you got to the 2 and 5 mile. The 2 and 5 mile is definitely the most run specific, but Jack Gazelle 2.0, and T850 all have running involved. So if you say you finish that and you want to get back into a little bit more lifting, any of those programs would be a great option, and you can still maintain your running and or maybe even continue to build your running, but just by a smaller amount, A, because you're a little bit more trained after that program, and B, just because it's a little less run specific. You kind of have to spread the fatigue and the recovery reserves out between the running and the lifting because they're more true hybrid programs than the 2 and 5 mile. Even though the 2 and 5 mile does have some lifting, it's just in support of running. So that would be what I recommend. Or you could kind of get onto like a maintenance plan where you're kind of maintaining and or slowly building the volume that you ended up with on the 2 and 5 mile, just kind of doing that 3 to 5, maybe 6 weeks of mostly maintenance running where you're doing mostly slow stuff, still incorporating some short strides, maybe some hill sprints, just to maintain that fast twitch ability, just to maintain the how you feel running at that speed, the adaptations that you've made, but you're not doing like true speed work, 400s, 800s, tempo work, and things like that. So any of those would be really good options. And yeah, enjoy the program. Let me know how it goes. Next question, is the Turkish getup valuable for SFAS prep? Not really. I mean, it's not going to hurt your SFAS prep, but it's certainly nowhere near a make or break exercise. I don't really think, unless you're training for like a Turkish getup competition, I can't really think of any event that Turkish getups would be required for. They're a solid full body stability exercise, and they can help with your mobility. They can help with your overhead stability. They can help with just a little bit with coordination. They're a little bit of a higher skill, not super high skill, but a little higher skill than just a classic barbell curl or something like that. So they're fine. But I have always thought the Turkish getup is quite overrated. A lot of people think it's like God's gift to all exercises and functionality. And I don't think that's the case. Can you do it during SFAS prep? Yes. Are you going to not get selected because you didn't do enough Turkish getups during SFAS prep? No. Next question, do officers in SF get to do the cool guy stuff like Enlisted, or is it limited? Yeah, they still get to do the cool guy stuff, just not quite as much. You're definitely more of an administrative. Your role is more administrative than what enlisted guy on the team would be. So you are kind of in charge of keeping the whole team in check. You're in charge of, like, when you go on target, you're not going to be the number one man going indoors. Maybe in training you might be a little bit. If you're doing like CQB training, you can be the number one or number two man, whatever. But if you're actually going on like a full mission profile, whether it's in training or in real life, you're not going to be the first guy in the door. You're going to be kind of standing back and controlling the situation. The ground force commander is kind of what it's called. Or if you're the company commander or something like that, you're controlling what all the teams on the target are doing or all the teams on the mission are doing. So you don't get to do quite as much cool guy stuff, but you still get to do plenty of it. Like if you're on a free fall team, you'll still jump with the guys. If you're on a dive team, you'll still do your dive and maritime ops with the guys. And so it's not like you're just a paper pusher or just sitting back and just watching what the other guys do. It's just a little bit less than what the enlisted guys are doing. Also, your team time is going to be less than an enlisted guy. So you might do 2 or 3 years on a team and then get moved on to either be a company commander or a commander for an S shop, depending on if you're staying in, getting out, you might get transferred somewhere else. So all in all, yes, you're going to be doing less cool stuff, but not zero cool stuff. And also you're going to be doing it for a shorter period of time. But that doesn't mean being an officer sucks or anything like that. But if you're going to SF and you really want to spend as much time on a team as possible, and you want to not be restricted or limited to what you're able to do, especially like on target in situations where you could be like put at risk or guys on your team might be at higher risk, then maybe going enlisted might be a better option. So of course you get paid more as an officer, and there are some other advantages to going officer, of course, but at the same time, most guys are more into the team life aspect of being in a group. And if you want that is your like main goal, then I would go enlisted. Next question, how should I pace tempo in fartlek runs? So hopefully if you're following a program, the creator of the program has some sort of pacing guidelines. If you're following any of my programs, I have pacing guidelines for pretty much everything. So I'm assuming you're not following one of my programs, or you're maybe following a program that just doesn't have any pacing, which is unfortunate because there's no way to perfectly answer this. It really depends. Tempo runs can be run at multiple different paces. Fartlek runs are even less structured. They can be run at a multitude of different paces. So I really won't answer the fartlek one thing because like there's so much variety in fartlek work, and you could run it all out. You could run some of the harder portions all out. You could run some of them at your 2 mile pace. You could run some of them at your goal 2 mile pace. You could run some of them at your goal half marathon pace. And that also is a big factor, is what are you training for? Tempo work usually is somewhere around threshold pace, which is a pace you can withstand for like 45 to 60 minutes. Or it could be a little faster than that, or it could be a little slower than that, depending on how long you're going, depending on whether you're doing tempo intervals, continuous tempo stuff, or what your training goal and what your workout looks like. So usually what I tell guys when I program most of my guys' tempo runs, I say, hey, if you could hold that pace for another 15 minutes, you chose the right pace. I give them actual paces. I give them RPEs, usually somewhere in the 7 to 8 RPE range for tempo work is a good spot to be. But also one of the litmus tests we use is like when you finish that run and you ask yourself, could I run another 15 minutes at that pace? And if you're able to say yes, then you probably paced it pretty well. If it's a longer tempo run, then maybe a little bit slower. Could I run that pace for another 20, 30 minutes? That's another consideration. But if you're going around threshold pace, either you know your threshold or you know about what pace you could run for approximately 1 hour, maybe a little under, then that could be a potential way to pace it. But it really depends on a multitude of different variables, how much running volume you're doing, what type of run you're training for. And tempo is a little bit more straightforward, but there are definitely different ways to run tempo. Like even if you're doing a lower volume run program, maybe you're running tempo work at your goal race pace. Maybe you're prepping for selection and you aren't running all that much because you did most of your running prior to the last little bit before you go. For example, my program, most of the tempo work is at race pace. So it's at 5 mile pace. It might be a 15 to 20 minute tempo run at 5 mile pace, or even goal 5 mile pace. because it's so much shorter than that 5 mile, and you're trying to get as much as you can out of these training sessions because there's only a little bit of running in that program, because I expect guys to do more running further out and switch to a little bit more balance going in. So that's the way I pace tempo work in a program like that. But in a general running program, or when I'm coaching my clients and we're doing higher volume, we're doing more running, then you definitely don't want to run all your tempo work at goal 5 mile pace. That's just not going to go very well, especially if you're going 25 minutes, 30 minutes, 35 minutes. You're just going to be smoked and you're not going to get much out of it, and you're probably going to get slower or injured. So didn't really answer that question. Fartlek work just depends on way too many things. You can do it at your tempo pace. You can do it at your 5 mile pace, your 2 mile pace, your goal 2 mile pace, your goal 5 mile pace, all out, multitude of different things. And tempo work is usually around your threshold pace, maybe a little faster, maybe a little bit slower, just depending on what you're doing. Next question, how detrimental is it to add a day off in programs due to my work schedule? I honestly think it's probably a positive, especially in the context of if you truly don't have time to train, you probably are also kind of tight on sleep. You're probably a little higher stress, and it may be just a better overall idea physically for long-term progress and gains, and not going a little bit too hard and potentially overdoing it, overtraining or overreaching, to actually take the day off when you need to. So I think it's always a good idea to listen to your body. And if your body is telling you, I can't train today, or if your schedule is telling you that, or a mix of both, and your schedule is truly telling you that, like you're not just bad at managing time, spending a bunch of time on social media, doing a bunch of things besides what you need to be doing all day, like doing a lot of time wasting activities, which a lot of people who say they don't have time, I'm not saying this is you, but a lot of people who say they don't have time to train are not managing their time very well. They're spending a lot of time just kind of scrolling or watching YouTube or doing a bunch of other time wasting stuff, and therefore they don't have time to train. They think they don't have time to train, but in reality they do. They just don't prioritize their time properly, or they don't prioritize training enough. But all that being said, if you are consistent otherwise, and maybe one day a week you have a crazy work day or something like that, you could either shift which days you do training sessions. So, if you have a crazy training day or a crazy work day on Wednesday, and Wednesday is supposed to be a crazy training day, maybe you can start your program like Tuesday, take Wednesday off, and then do your crazy training day on Thursday and go on from there. If it's different every week, kind of a different story. Taking the day off, not a big deal. But generally, this is probably a solid idea, rather than trying to, a lot of people in this situation might cut back on sleep. Like maybe usually they sleep 8 hours a night and they think, okay, I'm going to just sleep 5 hours tonight instead. Doing that once in a while, not a huge deal. But if you're doing that every single week, not a very good trade-off. You're kind of stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. So it depends on what all the other things you got going on. There's a lot of context missing here. I understand that you can't put a ton of context in an Instagram question, but generally, if you are consistent and sometimes you have to take a day off due to life obligations, it's not going to be a huge deal. Just get back on track the next day and continue. Next question, how much cardio do you recommend doing in a phase where strength and size is the goal? Yeah, so I would probably do mostly zone 2. I would do non-running cardio. If you, for whatever reason, really, really want to run and you have running goals at the same time, I know it's not your main goal. Your main goal is strength and size. But if you love running, doing a little bit of running is fine. However, it's going to interfere more than other forms of cardio that don't involve impact. But I would say if you can get 150-ish minutes per week of zone 2, and that could be spread out over 2 days, it could be spread out over 3 days, probably not one day, I would probably do it at least twice a week, then you are going to be getting all the benefits that you possibly could be from a health perspective. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them, as well as you're going to get the benefits of enhanced recovery. You're going to recover better from your training than you would if you did zero cardio. So if you want to really maximize your strength and size, you want to keep all of your cardio, at least the vast majority of it, low intensity, zone 2, long bikes, long rows, Stairmaster, incline walking are all excellent options, and you can kind of mix. You can even choose 2 or 3 machines at the gym and just go 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes a couple times through to kind of alleviate some boredom. But also, if you have a specific type of cardio that you want to maintain, whether it's running or swimming or biking, then you should probably prioritize that throughout this time. Even if you won't be able to make a lot of gains with it, you're still going to be doing enough of it where you're used to it. And when you get off the strength and size block, you can get back into training and cardio training, and you'll feel better and you'll perform better, and you'll still be at a respectable spot instead of kind of starting from scratch. So I used to think that when your main goal was to get as jacked and strong as possible, you shouldn't do any cardio and maybe just do some walking. I do not think that anymore. I think even if someone has only strength and size goals, doing some actual zone 2 where you're getting higher than what you would with walking, higher heart rate than you would with walking, is a good idea. Only because it's going to help you recover. It's going to keep you healthy as well, especially if you're in a bulk and you're trying to eat more food to make these gains, which I would if your main goal is size. It's pretty much the only option for most people, unless you're not natural or unless you've never really trained before. But you're going to be eating a calorie surplus, and doing conditioning throughout that time is going to make you more insulin sensitive. So you're going to be able to partition nutrients better. You're less likely to store them as fat, and they're more likely to aid in your muscle building. Of course, to an extent, cardio is not going to outdo or undo a ridiculously massive calorie surplus. But in general, doing a little bit of cardio can help with that. And like I said, it helps you recover from not only training sessions, but also in between sets. So you're going to be able to do more training volume, generally speaking, if you maintain some semblance of cardiovascular health. How about high intensity? Yes, you can do some HIIT, some sprints and things like that, especially if you're keeping them short and you're doing it properly and you're not overdoing it. But it is going to be more of a recovery burden than doing easy, long zone 2 stuff. So if you want to do a little bit of sprints, maybe once a week, you do 8 to 10, 12-second sprints on an air bike or something like that, or maybe even hill sprints or rower sprints, really whatever you want to do sprints on. That's totally fine with tons of rest in between. Make sure you're good to go. You're fully recovered between reps. That's the best way to do HIIT. A lot of people screw up HIIT by not resting long enough, and it's more of just like a moderate intensity interval training. And it's still not useless, but it's not actual HIIT. So those are some things I'd recommend. And yeah, if you can get that 150 minutes a week, even if you get 120, even if you get 100 minutes per week, you're still way better off than a lot of people when they were trying to gain size and strength, and you will definitely benefit from that in many different ways. Next question. I love this one. Could you go on a tangent about people walking their dogs? Yeah, so if you've been listening for a while, you've probably heard me say in a few episodes, I think it's a very irresponsible thing to do as a dog owner to not walk your dogs. So I will try and go on a somewhat politically correct tangent about it right now, as requested. Yeah, so dogs, they live for just a few different things. 1, they really like to eat. 2, they love to get pet. They love belly rubs. They enjoy being around their owners. Most of them, at least. 3, they like to sleep. 4, and this is not necessarily in order. For my dogs, it's probably eating first and sleeping second, and then walking is probably third. But either way, dogs really only need like 5 different things to thrive and live a very healthy, happy, fulfilled life. And one of them is walking, or at least exercise. And letting your dogs out in the backyard to just go fuck off is not enough exercise. They need to actually go and travel and move. Most dogs, maybe not like a bulldog, although I would argue if you want your bulldog to live longer, you should probably walk it because their genetics are such that they don't really live long, healthy lives. So if you try and kind of overcome that, or at least mitigate the downsides of their general genetic makeup by walking them and keeping them fit and healthy and happy, then that's usually a pretty good idea. But anyway, taking your dogs out for a walk, most people who don't walk their dogs really need to walk themselves. They really need to be less lazy themselves. So that's one thing. 2, your dog really, really wants it and needs to be allowed out in nature and needs to move in order to thrive and really feel fulfilled. Like they need to feel, certain dogs especially need to feel some sort of purpose. And if they're just sitting around the house all day with their owner, who also just sits around the house all day or just doesn't exercise, the owner's not going to be very healthy. The dog's not going to be very healthy. The dog's not going to be very happy. And I think it's very irresponsible to purchase a dog and or rescue a dog. By the way, I highly recommend rescuing a dog if you want a dog. There are lots and lots of dogs that get killed every single day. And I am a major dog lover, and I would love to save every single dog in existence if that was feasible. But unfortunately, I can't. I am not really a fan of going out and purchasing a dog or getting like this perfect dog breed, whatever. And I am biased because I have 2 rescue dogs, but I think it's a very good idea to rescue dogs if you are considering getting a dog. And if you're worried about how they behave, guess what? The behavior of of a dog can be changed by the owner by, again, not being lazy and actually putting some time into it. So getting a dog is a fucking commitment. And if you are going to commit to getting a dog, you're also committing to all the things that involve owning dogs. And I promise you, taking your dog for a 15-minute walk, a 10-minute walk, once or twice a day at very, very minimum, I would recommend probably more than that, is a high payoff thing, not just for your dog, but also it's usually a good idea for the human, for health and well-being and being disconnected from the world of connectivity, at least some part of the day. So I wasn't really prepared fully for that rant, but I do think that not walking your dog is a mild form of animal abuse, because you are literally taking one of the things that are most important to them and most critical for them to enjoy their lives and be happy and healthy away from them by not walking them. And I think that's extremely irresponsible. And I absolutely can't stand it. I have probably, out of 25 houses on my street with dogs, probably less than 10 people actually walk them. And it's the same people. There are houses that I'll walk by and I never even knew there was a dog in that house until like one day that dog barks at me out through the window, or that dog's like out in the backyard just kind of hanging out. So as someone who's very passionate about this, thank you for inquiring. I try to keep my thoughts about this as unbiased and general as possible, but I am very biased and very highly opinionated on this subject. And yeah, if you have a dog and you don't walk it, guess what? You can start today and take your dog for a walk. It's not hard, and it's probably going to benefit you. You're going to feel better about yourself because you are actually enhancing your dog's life. And you're also just going to feel better when you do it consistently because it's going to be healthy for you. So that will be the end of my rant. Thank you for asking. Next question. How do you go about rotating your running shoes? I usually rotate them based on what surface I'm running and what type of run I'm doing that day. So I've got a few different pair of trail shoes. I've got a few different pair of road shoes. One of my road shoes, I've got the Hoka Mach 6s, which is not necessarily a speed shoe. It's more of just like a going out and cruising on the road, either a long run or just a moderate run on the road. I've got the Glycerin 21s, Rucks Glycerin 21s that are a little bit more of a hybrid shoe. Not great for speed work, a little bit bulky for speed work, but pretty decent for like tempo work and slower. And then I've got the Vaporflies, which are definitely a speed work shoe that I wear only for speed work. I don't do easy runs or anything like that. So depending on what run I'm doing that day, if it's on a road, that's how I'll choose between those shoes. And then I've got a few trail shoes. One is my newest ones are the Nike Ultraflies, which I have not actually ran in. I've worn them. I've walked in them. But because I got them like right when I got injured, I haven't actually tested them out with a run, so more to follow on those. And then I've got 2 other trail shoes that I just kind of rotate back and forth. One of them is a zero drop from Ultra, the Lone Peak 7s. So zero drops are not good or bad necessarily. They're just different than most running shoes that you'll see. Most running shoes have a little bit of a drop from heel to toe, and you can definitely get used to running in the zero drop. They kind of not necessarily force you to use better form, but if you don't use really good form when you're running, or if you're heel striking, overstriding, whatever it is, you're probably going to get banged up a little bit. So they can almost be like a way, like almost like an adjunct to improve your running form. But also at the same time, if you've never run in zero drop shoes and you just go out and do your entire weekly mileage that you usually do in your zero drops, you might hurt yourself. It should be like a slow transition. But usually I just went back and forth, run to run, between those and my Fuga Do Trail, which are not a zero drop. They're more of like a heavy duty, higher traction trail shoe with the lock laces, the BOA lock laces. So I really liked all of those shoes, and it really just depends on what type of running that I'm doing that day. If you do runs that are very similar on similar terrain almost all the time, I would say you probably only need 2 pairs of shoes. Ideally, if you have 2 pairs of shoes and you run, especially if you're running back-to-back days, like multiple days a week, and oftentimes on back-to-back days, if you're running very low volume, doesn't really matter that much. But if you're running decently high volume and very frequently, giving your shoes a little bit of a day off periodically by rotating back and forth is usually a good idea. So it does depend on what you're going for and what types of surfaces you run on. It depends on what your runs kind of look like, but that's the way I go about it. Next question, if my boots get wet at selection, should I suck it up for a while or switch boots ASAP? Generally, you want to suck it up for a little while because most likely if they get wet, they're going to get wet again. There are situations where changing into a different boot might be a good idea. Like if you're almost done for the day or something like that, you go through water and you know you just have a dry walk all the way back and then you're just completely done. Honestly, I would probably just keep them on just because hopefully your feet are prepared enough to where walking for a little while in wet boots aren't going to give you crazy blisters or anything like that. But generally, I would just keep them on and continue. And if your feet are well prepared and your boots are broken in and your feet have gone through the necessary adaptations throughout training, which they will if you train consistently and you don't use all these blister prevention techniques that I've talked about recently, proactively or prophylactically before you actually expose your feet to the stress, almost like wearing a glove in the gym and not getting calluses, then you should be totally fine walking with wet boots. That's just part of the process. Your feet are going to get wet. A lot of people will go to great lengths to avoid their feet getting wet. And oftentimes what happens, like if there's a water crossing or something like that, and there's maybe like this pretty complicated route to like step on some logs and rocks and whatever to get across, oftentimes what I see happen is guys will fall in. They'll not only get their feet wet, but get way more than their feet wet when they could have just walked across and sucked it up and got their feet wet. So usually I recommend keeping the same boots because if you go through water and you change, then what happens when you come up to your next water crossing? Do you stop and put your wet boots back on to go through the water again and then put your dry boots back on? Or do you just continue with wet boots and walk through multiple different water crossings or multiple different places, or your feet are just sweating all day? So the main downside of changing into your dry boots is you probably don't have another pair of boots that you could put in. Hopefully not. Usually people don't ruck with 2 pairs of backup boots in their ruck. If you're at selection, you're not going to want multiple different pairs of boots in your ruck just because that weight adds up. But usually you're just better sticking to it and getting your feet to where you can survive with wet boots. I promise you, it is totally possible to walk with wet boots for 12 plus hours straight and not get blisters if you prepare your feet properly. If you don't, your feet are going to be destroyed. If you go through water and you walk for a little while and you feel like you're about to get hot spots or something like that, or maybe you've got a blister forming, that might be an opportunity, might be a situation where I'd recommend maybe changing into dry boots and taking that time to do so, and then potentially having to deal with another boot change in the future. But in most cases, just sticking to the wet boots is usually a good idea. And what you definitely don't want to do is get your boots wet. And believe me, this sounds like absolute common sense, but I'm saying it for a reason. I've seen and heard of people doing this. They'll get 1 pair of boots wet, and then they'll immediately change their socks and their boots, and then they'll come up to another water crossing, and then they will go right through it with their dry boots. Now they have 2 pair of wet boots. Don't do that. It shouldn't need to be said, but it does need to be said because I've seen it happen before. And that is just lacking in the common sense department. But I usually am a fan of sucking it up, and that's usually what I recommend. There are situations that are exceptions, but for the most part, just send it. Next question, we'll make this the last one. How do you avoid cramps during a run? They're very annoying. Yeah, so cramps are actually a pretty complicated subject. Even people who spend lots of time studying cramps and doing science experiments on cramps to figure out like what's causing them still don't have a definitive cause for, they haven't come up with a definitive reason for every cramp. Generally though, your cramps are probably either or maybe even a combination of dehydration, poor hydration, and or insufficient fitness. So usually if you get a cramp in a muscle that is being used, so if you're rucking and you hit mile 10 and you get a cramp in your quad or your hamstring or your calf, you're using those muscles a lot. And especially if you're doing some sort of time trial and you're not used to rucking with that much intensity or that much volume, your fitness levels, your conditioning is just not where it needs to be to avoid those cramps. So that's usually like an overuse or overworked musculature cause. Now, if you're doing the same thing, you're rucking, you hit mile 10 and you get a cramp like in your ab, like your abdominal wall locks up, which is miserable, by the way. It could be maybe an overuse of musculature thing, but it's usually not. It's usually more indicative of poor hydration. So the main things to focus on are building your fitness, continuing to build fitness like you otherwise would, increasing volume, increasing intensity, resting, recovering, being consistent, just general fitness gains. You will see a reduction in the occurrences of cramps over time as you get more fit. And 2, making sure you're hydrated. You're really well hydrated, really well fed as well. So hydration is not just water. A lot of people will cramp up like crazy because all they do is just drink water during their runs. And that's only one component of hydration. Also involved are electrolytes, in particular during training. Sodium is super duper important. Magnesium and potassium, the other electrolytes, are very important as well, but you don't lose as many of those as sodium during training. So you really want to make sure that you are taking in water continuously as well as sodium electrolytes. You can check out Quench Hydration. I've got a link in the description. Discount code Terminator_training for 15% off. Those are great. There's a ton of other electrolyte supplements out there, but some sort of consistent water and sodium intake, especially if you're going really long. Now, if you get like a side stitch and it is a really short run and you're not really getting like muscular cramps or anything like that, it's just kind of like a painful side stitch that just feels a little bit like someone's like digging into your side or your abdominal wall or something like that. That's different. That's usually a fueling thing, potentially eating too close to your session or eating the wrong foods, like higher fiber foods or higher fat foods around your session. So you want to keep, as I always say, fat and fiber low around training and make sure you're timing it right. If you go back to the last episode, I talk all about nutrition issues. And if you feel like you're not fueling your training properly or adequately or at all, then you should definitely listen to that episode. You can find out some good, valuable information on that. But if it's like a muscular cramp, it's usually going to be some sort of electrolyte imbalance or insufficient hydration. Or, like I said, if it's in the working muscle, it's usually insufficient fitness and insufficient conditioning, which can be solved by continuing to train consistently. Lastly, if you're getting cramps like in the evening when you're laying down, or maybe you get woken up in the middle of the night by a calf cramp or a quad cramp or something like that, that absolutely could be hydration, but also it could be low magnesium. So this is just one potential cause. It's not the cause or anything like that, but taking some magnesium right before you go to bed, A, can help you just relax in general, can help with sleep. A lot of sleep supplements have magnesium in them, but B, it also can potentially reduce the chances of you getting some crazy cramp that wakes you up in the middle of the night. And that's just kind of annoying and not fun. So all forms of magnesium are not created equal. You get the stuff at the grocery store. I think it's magnesium oxide. Not great. It's basically just a laxative. Your body doesn't really absorb it. It's not bioavailable. Magnesium bisglycinate would probably be the best for this particular situation. And it also can be a great thing to take for sleep. There's other forms of magnesium that are great. Citrate, threonate, also awesome. But magnesium bisglycinate for this particular reason, also known as magnesium glycinate, are good options for this. So hydrate well, get really fit, fuel your training appropriately by going to last episode and listening to the fueling mistakes, and you should be on your way to a cramp-free, or at least less cramps than what you normally get, training career and feeling good and crushing. So yeah, guys, that's it. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll be back soon with another episode. Till then, Terminator out.